Welcome to Oldie World. I'm your host, Brandon Johnson, owner of Bodybuilder Bulldogges, and I'm excited to be here with you today to talk some more about our love of Olde English Bulldogges. I realized last week after our first inaugural episode that I didn't really do any introduction about myself or who I am, so I thought today I would start off with that, and then after a brief little bit about me and who I am and Bodybuilder Bulldogges, I thought I would jump off into discussing heat sensitivity with Olde English Bulldogges. So to begin with, a little bit about who I am as your host. I have been married for almost 20 years. My wife and I got married in 2004 in September. So we're coming up on our 20th anniversary. I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and 1 girl. My oldest is about to graduate high school in 2 days, so starting to feel like the old man around here. I have lived my entire life in Oklahoma and Texas. I was born in South Texas, the very, very southern part of South Texas, McAllen. But I have spent the vast majority of my life in Oklahoma, consider myself an Oklahoman. My journey with breeding and with bulldogs began over a decade ago. My first breeding experience was been 15, almost 18 years ago with English Mastiffs. We had a couple of litters of English Mastiffs. I was really ignorant back then on breeding and raising dogs, but I got my first pair of Olde English Bulldogges in 2012 and had my first litter near the end of 2012. The first 2 dogs that I got, I purchased from a guy in Shawnee, Oklahoma, but they were produced by a man who's become a good friend of mine. His name is Larry Kitchell, the owner and founder of Osage County Bulldogges in Ponca City, Oklahoma. He produced the first 2 dogs that I purchased and that I had a couple of litters out of, and really fell in love with the breed because of those 2 dogs. That was in 2012. In mid 2015, we took the leap and went full-time with Olde English Bulldogges. And today we have a full kennel facility that includes a 30 by 50 kennel building. We have 2 different climate-controlled facilities for whelping and young puppies and new moms. We have 2 outdoor 16 by 16 puppy pens that are raised with wooden floors, along with a whole host of other smaller facilities, some in our house for newborns and for expectant mamas. So we have it's grown from quite a lot from the first pair into what we have today. We've placed puppies in homes basically in almost every state in America, including Alaska. We've sent multiple puppies to Alaska. The last one that went to Alaska, I actually flew up there and delivered myself, which was a really cool experience. The only state that I know of that I have never placed a puppy in is the state of Hawaii. They have a lot more strict importing regulations, and so we have never actually placed a puppy in Hawaii. Maybe at some point we will, but up to this point we have chosen not to do that. We have even exported a puppy once to France for a kennel to use as their foundation stock male when they were first beginning their kennel, and that was a really cool experience. Not an easy necessarily experience, but a really cool experience. And we're really glad to be able to help someone else kick off their kennel in another country. That was a really, really neat thing to add to our resume. We are coming up on our 130th litter of Olde English Bulldog puppies. In preparation for this episode, I was going back through some of our records and realized as I was counting up that we're on, I think it's litter 128. So before this year is over, we will break the 130 mark, which is hard to believe. And maybe the funniest thing is when I sit and think about all the hours of sleep that adds up to that I have lost in the last 12 years or so. If you've ever whelped a litter of bulldog puppies, you know that oftentimes that means a lot of lost sleep, and I certainly have lost a lot of sleep over the last decade with 130 litters of puppies under my belt. Also, when it comes to our breed stock, we are about to the point where pretty much every dog in our kennel, there are a couple of exceptions, but the majority of the dogs in our kennel, you can trace our own bloodline, Bodybuilder Bulldogges bloodline, back 4 to 5 generations. We've certainly mixed in some outside blood from time to time, but from on one or oftentimes on both sides of our dogs' pedigrees, you will see Bodybuilder Bulldogs back 4 to 5 generations. So I'm certainly not the authority on Old English Bulldogs, but we definitely do have quite a bit of experience from over the last decade or so. So that's a little bit about me. And again, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Oldie World as we try to build this platform and spread love and education for the Old English Bulldog. Today, the real subject that I want to spend a little bit of time discussing is heat sensitivity. And the Old English Bulldog is a breed that was invented to make a more functional and a healthier bulldog. Back in the 70s, when the Oldie was originated, the functionality and health of the regular English Bulldog, the AKC registered English Bulldog, was just not where some people really wanted it to be. And so that is how the Oldie was conceived, was to be a healthier, more functional bulldog. And part of that functionality was to have a dog that could withstand the heat better, that wasn't quite so heat sensitive as the English Bulldog. And so that's where this subject comes in when we talk about the Oldie, is that the idea is that it would be less heat sensitive than its English Bulldog relative. However, as we talk about the idea of heat exhaustion and heat stroke amongst Oldies, I want to talk about dogs in general first when it comes to heat sensitivity. The fact of the matter is that all dogs are vulnerable to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Some breeds more than others, but all dogs are vulnerable to it. In fact, there was a study done in the UK, and the study was done based upon heat-related illnesses among breeds. And in the top 6 breeds, Bulldogs were certainly in the top 6, but also greyhounds were found in the top 6, which is a dog that we don't think of as being at risk for heat stroke or heat-related illness. It's not built anything like any type of bulldog. But greyhounds were found in that list. And so I bring that up just to illustrate the point that all dogs are at risk for heat-related illnesses. There are many, many factors that play into heat-related illnesses such as heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And I think it's important for us to recognize those different factors because it's really easy just to label certain breeds as heat sensitive and think that that's all there is to it as a specific breed. But there are so many factors that play into dogs having heat-related problems. Obviously, number one is temperature. Humidity is another major factor that oftentimes gets overlooked, and we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. Activity level is another big factor in whether a dog suffers from heat-related illness. If it's a really, really active dog, it's going to be more at risk. If it's a really low-energy dog, it's probably going to be at a little bit lower risk. Age plays a factor. Overall health plays a factor. Body condition is a big, big indicator of whether a dog is at risk for heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Also things such as coat length, coat type, and coat density. All these things play a factor in whether a dog suffers from heat-related illnesses. Now, in regards to Oldies, and are Oldies heat sensitive? And I want to begin by saying absolutely, they are heat sensitive. People often ask me about my dogs and their well-being when we get really, really cold weather. I'm located here in Oklahoma, and we have really cold winters at times, and we have really hot summers at times. I know some of you in the north are laughing at me right now by saying Oklahoma has really cold winters. We don't have extended really cold winters, but we do have some cold snaps that can be really, really cold. I remember it's been 2 or 3 years back now, we had a cold snap where temperatures here in Oklahoma in the central part where I live got down to about 16 below zero at night a couple of times. And we really had to do some things to take care of our dogs to make sure they weren't at risk of getting too cold. We brought most of them in, put them in heated facilities. But I remember one night as I was rearranging our kennels and moving dogs into the heated facilities that I went to check on Major. And he's one of my main stud dogs. He's a big blue seal, about an 80-pound, really thick, girthy dog, has a lot of mass. And I went into his kennel to get him and to move him into a different facility where it'd be heated, and I could hear him snoring. And I looked down at his doghouse, and he was stretched out in his doghouse with his head laying out the door of his doghouse in a snowdrift, sleeping when it's below zero outside. And that's just the way that oldies oftentimes are. And so I get a kick out of it when people ask me during cold weather, how are your dogs doing? Are you concerned about them? And honestly, my reaction at most times is I'm not that concerned about cold weather. I get concerned as an oldie breeder and an oldie owner when the temperatures are up and the humidity is high. That's when I worry because my dogs are a lot more sensitive to heat than they are to cool or to cold weather. So before we delve into the oldie specifically and heat sensitivity, I want to talk for a minute for educational purposes about how dogs cool themselves. Biologically, how their bodies are designed to deal with heat and to cool themselves down. I think that's important in our understanding of oldies and heat sensitivity. So dogs have two methods of cooling themselves. Number one is conduction and convection. And that is their body, as their body temperature rises, the blood vessels in the skin dilate to increase blood flow, and this enables the heat to be lost from the blood around the body. We witness this as dog owners on a regular basis when your dog comes in from being outside and being hot, and it goes and finds a cold tile and lies down on it. What they're doing is they've gotten hot. The blood vessels on the outside of their body around their skin have dilated, and they have extra blood flow around the outer part of their body. And they're going and finding something cold to lay on so that it will draw that heat out of the blood that's now at the outside of their body. And that blood is cooled and now circulates throughout their body. We see dogs do this all the time. When you turn a dog loose into your backyard and it's hot outside, they go find a shady place. They scratch off all the grass where it's bare dirt, dig down, an inch or two to where the cool dirt's exposed, and they lie down. And the reason they do that is, again, it's that convection and conduction. They're trying to cool their body by laying down on a cool surface of the dirt. If you were to dig down in your dirt just a foot or two, you're going to find that it's basically a constant 50, 55 degrees. And they're trying to use that cool earth to draw some of the heat out of their body. We see dogs do this when they lie on cold tile or AC vents, when they dig and lay in fresh dirt, or if you have a kiddie pool in your backyard and they go and lie in the kiddie pool or in their water bowl. They're trying to cool themselves off. That's the way their body's designed, is by those blood vessels enlarging and the blood moving out near the skin. They find somewhere cool so that heat can be conducted or convected out of their body from those enlarged blood vessels, and hopefully by finding a cool surface to lay on. The second method that a dog's biology has been designed to cool itself is with evaporative cooling. We as humans rely on this same type of cooling method when we sweat. We sweat, and as the wind blows across, it causes that sweat to evaporate, and we feel that cooling sensation. Well, canines have very few sweat glands. They have a few in the bottom of their feet, on the pads of their feet. But for the most part, they don't really have sweat glands that can really cool themselves down. But they use evaporative cooling through means of panting. It's their form of evaporative cooling. They use their respiratory systems to achieve evaporative cooling and cool themselves down from the inside out. So when you see a dog pant, that's what they're doing. They're hopefully drawing in dry air and then expressing out that humid air, and that evaporation through the sinuses and the respiratory tract helps cool their body. So they're cooling from the outside with the conduction and convection with the enlarged blood vessels around the skin, and they're cooling from the inside out with the evaporative cooling as they pant. And this is the way that their biology has been designed to operate. So that leads us into the discussion of why are oldies then heat sensitive? There are a lot of different breeds out there, and as we've already stated, all breeds can suffer from heat-related illnesses. But why are oldies more heat sensitive than other dogs? And there's really three main reasons for that. They are brachycephalic, and you may laugh at my pronunciation. That's the best you're going to get out of me, even as an oldie breeder. Brachycephalic, and that is they are a short muzzle, and that short muzzle oftentimes means that they may have an extended palate, which restricts airflow, and they may also have a narrower trachea, which restricts airflow. Now, both of these things are issues that as breeders we do try to minimize and at times even eliminate. We try to breed away from that extended palate, and we try to breed dogs that may have had small tracheas to dogs that have really large tracheas so that we can enlarge that in our line. But it kind of comes inherent with that short muzzle, as those things oftentimes come with it, and that restricted airflow limits the dog's ability to cool itself through that evaporative method that we discussed a moment ago. It's not that they have no evaporative cooling, but their evaporative cooling ability is reduced because they don't have as much airflow as dogs who don't have an extended long soft palate, or who have a really large trachea and there's no restriction of that airflow. However, that's only one reason. Second reason that oldies are heat sensitive is, in many cases, is body fat percentage or body fat content. Fat acts as an insulation, especially that outer layer of fat around an oldie. As we talked about last week, there are different types of oldies. Some oldies have more body fat than others. That fat acts as an insulation around the dog, which causes them to it's more difficult for them to cool. It takes longer for them to cool. That fat holds the heat in, and they're not able to cool themselves as quickly or as efficiently. And thirdly, body mass plays a big part in how effective a dog can cool itself, or how quickly a dog can cool itself. A good general rule is the more mass means a hotter dog. One study conducted on post-race body temperature of greyhounds. So what we're talking about here are greyhounds who have just finished a race, and this study was conducted to check their body temperature. Okay, so in this study, they found that dogs with greater lean body mass were significantly hotter than lighter dogs. So let me run that by you one more time. Dogs with significantly greater body mass were significantly hotter than lighter dogs. So, and these are not dogs who are fat. These dogs have a very, very low body fat percentage or body fat content. They're very lean dogs. They're racing dogs. But yet, some of them have a lot of really lean muscle. And the more lean muscle, they found those dogs had a higher temperature and oftentimes took longer to cool. It's because the more mass you have, the longer it takes for your body to cool down. And this is true amongst many different mammals, and it's certainly true with dogs. And oldies are certainly a massive animal. They're bred to be that way. That's what the standard calls for. A dog with nice girth, with nice spring in the rib cage, a dog with a lot of muscle mass. And so it's inherent in the oldie type that they're not going to cool as rapidly as some other breeds that are lighter boned, lighter skinned, lighter muscled, not as girthy. And so we understand this when we look outside of the dog world. We see this all throughout many different animals. You might even think of like horses. When you look at a thoroughbred that's made to run for a long distance, they're really long and really lean. However, if you look at a draft horse that's made for just raw power, you see a lot more bulk and a lot more mass. And the same thing is true in the oldie world. When you have dogs that are bred for long and endurance, they're going to be dogs that are a lot lighter of frame and have a lot less mass because they're going to need to cool themselves a lot more efficiently. Whereas oldies are built to be big and thick and girthy like a draft horse, and they accomplish that task really well when bred correctly, but they do not cool as quickly as some other breeds that are much lighter in structure and lighter in mass. So I have been posed a question a time or two, and I think it's only natural for people who are new to our breed to ask this question. Why don't we just breed oldies that aren't heat sensitive? Why don't we just breed dogs that are just as good as any other breed at cooling themselves and at dealing with high temperatures? I want to begin by saying, first off, we've already established that all dogs can have heat-related illness. This isn't just an oldie thing. All dogs can be susceptible, but oldies are more susceptible than some other breeds. And here's the reason why we don't just breed dogs as oldie breeders that have no problem with heat. Frankly, we could. We could breed dogs that didn't struggle with heat at all. However, they wouldn't look like bulldogs. We could easily breed a dog that would tolerate heat as well as any other breed. However, in doing so, we would eliminate all the features that make it a bulldog, because those very features that make it a bulldog are the very features that make it more heat sensitive than some other breeds. We could also breed strictly for those extreme features and extreme traits with no concern for heat sensitivity, but the result would likely be a dog that's non-functional in temperatures over 75 or 80 degrees. So us oldie breeders are stuck in this position where we must balance the type and the traits of a bulldog while also prioritizing our production's abilities to handle heat better than previous generations or for comparison reasons, the English Bulldog. So we really have to walk this tightrope and work this balance of, I need to produce a dog that carries the traits of a bulldog and yet try to make it better in its functionality, especially when it comes to heat and heat sensitivity. An oldie will either look like a bulldog and have some heat sensitivity due to the traits and type of a bulldog, or it will handle heat well and not resemble a bulldog at all. There's no way to have your cake and eat it too in this situation. If you're going to have a really thick, girthy dog that has a really pretty short muzzle, you're going to have a dog that is more sensitive to heat than, say, a greyhound or some of your other dogs that are bred for high temperatures. Oldies, you just cannot have all those traits and have a dog that has no heat sensitivity. Good breeders strive to balance breathing and heat sensitivity along with the type and structure as they make their breeding selections. So, here's some tips for your oldie and high temperatures. I want to start by saying that prevention is always the best route. Prevent your oldie or your bulldog or whatever dog it is that you have, prevent them from getting overheated to start with. Are there things you can do once your dog is overheated? Yes. But the very best thing you can do is to prevent them from being in that situation to begin with. Keep an eye on them when they're outside during high temperatures. You might want to think of your oldie as like a toddler. Like, you just let your toddler out. What are they going to do? They're going to find a way to get into something. They're going to find a way to hurt themselves. They're going to find a way to tear something up. Think of your oldie with that type of mindset when you let your oldie outside in high temperatures. Don't just let your oldie out when it's 103 degrees outside and forget about them for an hour or two. There's a good chance your oldie is going to get themselves in trouble and may become overheated. Have an easy and convenient cooling method for when they're out in the heat. Have a pool of water. One of the easiest things you can do if you're an oldie owner is in the backyard, have a kiddie pool, have 3 inches, 6 inches, 10 inches of water in the kiddie pool so that your dog at any time can get in the pool, lie down, and they can begin to use that conduction and convection system that their body has to cool themselves off. Another thing you can do is provide a fan and shade so that they have a place in their yard to where they can get out of the sun, they can get out of the heat, and they can try to cool down a little bit. Here's something that a whole lot of us have had to learn the hard way, and that is be watchful for things that will increase your dog's activity in high temperatures. I remember the first time that I learned this lesson, it was with my first pair. It was with a stud dog I had named Ace, and a friend of ours from church came over to disc up a portion of our yard so my wife could plant a garden. He was had his rototiller out. He was going to turn the earth so that my wife could go out and plant a garden the next day. And that plot where he was doing that was just on the other side of Ace's pen. And I went inside, wasn't paying any attention. About 20 or 30 minutes after our friend from church arrived, I looked out the back window and I can see Ace running up and down the fence. He has himself worked up into a frenzy. And by the time I get outside, he is so hot and he is so worked up, he can barely stand up. He can't walk straight. He looks like he's about to pass out. He was suffering from heat exhaustion and not far from heat stroke. And that was my fault. I had introduced into his area a piece of machinery he had never seen, he had never experienced, and he got really excited. Something was in his territory. He was going to defend his territory. He got all worked up, and it wasn't even that hot outside. But that 75 degrees with him running up and down the fence at full tilt with his anxiety through the roof was enough to get him in trouble. But that was my fault as his owner for putting him in that situation. We need to be mindful as Olde owners about things that will increase our dog's activity level during these high temperatures. Be mindful of those things. If your neighbor's out mowing, then the minute you hear that lawnmower start up in your neighbor's yard, bring your dog in. Bring him in the garage. Bring him in the house with you. Put him in their crate. Whatever it is, make sure that you put them in a situation where they're not going to be overstressed or they're not going to be overexcited and work themselves up into a state in which they're overheated. Here's something that's also really important that many, many people do not take into account, and that is that you really need to be mindful of humidity. A lot of people only watch temperature. I personally would much rather, as an Olde owner and an Olde breeder, deal with 102 degree day than I would rather deal with an 89 degree day when the humidity is really high. If the humidity is low, give me a 100 degree day and that's fine. I can keep my dogs cool. That won't be a problem. You give me really high humidity with moderately high temperatures, and that can be a real struggle for your dog. It messes with their ability to cool themselves. It messes with that evaporative system they have to cool themselves down. All that panting isn't accomplishing much cooling because all that humid air is not evaporating. It's just remaining a liquid. And so that's the reason that humidity causes them to really struggle. So secondly, in addition to just preventative things that we can do to help our oldies, we can provide them a setup to keep them cool. Now, there's a whole lot of different setups, and everybody has their own idea about what's best for their dog, and I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do specifically about your oldie. A lot of people have them as their indoor pet, sleep in their bed. That's great for people in that situation. You don't have to worry as much about overheating, because when your dog is outside, probably the most of the time you're with them. The rest of the time they're in the air conditioning with you, and that's great. However, if your oldie is outside, whether is outside the majority of the time or only outside some of the time, you need to provide them a place outdoors that is safe, that's a good setup for them to stay cool as the temperatures rise. First and foremost, shade. Make sure they have a place in the shade. Do not stick your oldie out in the backyard where they are fully exposed to the sun and they have nowhere to get out of the sun to stay cool. I don't know how many times I have heard terrible stories that have ended in tragedy because of something that would have been easily solved and easily prevented if there had just been some shade provided. You can get online to Greenhouse Megastore. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot. Many of these places you can buy shade cloth. You can order it through Amazon. You can get it in an array of different sizes. You can get it in a vast array of different shading percentages, everything from 40% all the way up to 90%. Provide a little bit of shade for your dog. It will go a long ways to keeping them happier and healthier and cooler. Secondly, give them a fan. Just provide them a fan, something they can sit in front of. Again, this helps not only with the evaporative cooling, it also helps with that the convection cooling that we discussed earlier. You have that cool air flowing over the body and over the skin where those blood vessels have enlarged and all that blood is at. That air flowing over that helps cool the body. It helps remove that heat. So fans go a long ways. I'll tell you another really key thing you can do for your dog, your oldie, in your outdoor facility for them is provide them with a combination of the shade, of a fan, and of misters. Those three things will go so far in keeping your oldies happy. That's the combination that I use in my outdoor facilities is shade, fans, and misters. Shade removes the direct sunlight, which lowers the temperature. The misters actually work as an evaporative cooler in addition to the dog's already built-in evaporative cooling system. There have been plenty of studies that show that if you have a mister system, that as that mist falls and evaporates, it can lower the temperature in your kennel facility between 20 and 30 degrees. So if you're in the South like I am, and you have a 100-degree day, and you turn your misters on, within a matter of a few minutes, the air temperature in your kennel is going to go from 80 degrees to somewhere between 75, or from 100 degrees. Let me back up. The air temperature is going to go from anywhere from 100 degrees, like it is all around, to anywhere from 75 to 80 degrees, just simply because you're getting that evaporative cooling from your mister system. Now, when you combine that with the shade and with the fan, your oldies not only have their own system that you're helping with the evaporative cooling, but you're also putting a fan to blow over them to help with that convection cooling. You have whatever mist does not evaporate falling on them as a cool mist landing on the skin, and is again helping that conductive and convective cooling system in their skin from those enlarged blood vessels. And you're creating an environment where they're really, really comfortable. On any given summer day here in central Oklahoma, it could be 100, 102, 103 degrees. I can go into my outdoor kennel, walk through the facility where I have these really bully, really thick, really muscular dogs, and I can hear them snoring in all their dog houses because they have fans blowing on them. They have this nice mister system keeping them cool. They're in the shade. They're not exposed to the sun. Any place where the sun would come into their kennels and force them to be exposed to the sun, I have shade cloth up. And this provides them that environment where they're just set up to be cool. Now, there are other things that can come into play, like we've talked about. You could have something come up that really gets them worked up and riled up and their activity level spikes, and we can have an issue. But we have set them up in an environment to begin with where they have the best opportunity to remain cool in spite of triple-digit heat. Another thing that you can add for your oldie, in addition to shade, fans, and misters, is you can provide them with a bed of some sort that's raised that allows airflow underneath. I remember my first exposure with this was actually purely by accident. We built a kennel facility. It would have been probably back in 2014, and it was above ground. And so the dogs actually walked up a ramp into their kennel, and the floor was perforated. It allowed air to come up and down through the floor, and it allowed like liquid to fall through the floor. And the dogs absolutely loved it. I noticed the very first time I went out there, it was late in the afternoon after we had just got it erected and just got them put in there. And one of my stud dogs that oftentimes struggled with heat more than any other was just laid over, just out cold. He was just snoozing away in the hottest part of the day, when normally he would have been struggling if I didn't have him in the air conditioning. And the reason for that is he now had a place to lie down where he not only had airflow over the top of him, but he had airflow around him 360 degrees. He was no longer just cooling the top part of his body with airflow, but the underneath and the sides as well. So if you can get a bed of some sort for your oldie where they can get on it, that's raised above ground, that allows airflow underneath and all around them, it will really, really help keep them cool. So a raised bed with airflow is a nice way to help your oldie stay cool as well. In addition to this, my last recommendation for helping your oldie during high temperatures is, as we get to this time of year, it's early May here now. As we get to this time of year and temperatures and humidity are rising, this is a time of year when you need to be slimming your dogs down a little bit. Sometimes in the winter, I know especially here I'll try to pack on a little bit more weight as the temperatures start to cool off. I'll try to add 2 to 5 pounds typically to any one of my dogs, depending on what their average body weight is. Give them a little bit extra layer of insulation for the wintertime. And on the flip side of that, as we get into this time of year when it's starting to get hot, I want to shed that extra fat. I want them to shed that because that's extra insulation, and I don't want them insulating in excess heat. So start trimming your dogs down as we get to this time of year. If your dog is obese, is overweight, you are doing them no favors in the summertime. You're only putting them more at risk. Don't let their begging get to you. Don't let those sad eyes get in the way. Stick to your guns, be firm, and keep them leaner in the heat. It's for their own well-being. It's for their own good. Trim them back down. So as we wrap up today, there's probably some more that we could say about heat sensitivity, but I think that will suffice for now. This is a time of year when temperatures and humidity are on the rise. As an oldie owner, be aware. Keep these things in mind. Have your setup ready so that your dog can stay cool to prevent them from getting hot to begin with. Give them the things they need to succeed. Again, thank you today for joining us on Oldie World. That's going to be it for today. I'm your host, Brandon Johnson with Bodybuilder Bulldogges. If we would love to hear from you, you can reach out to us through email and reach me at bodybuilderbulldogges@gmail.com. Check out our website at www.bodybuilderbulldogges.com. We would love to hear from you about episode ideas or questions or thoughts that you might have or feedback on the show. Again, please subscribe. We're trying to grow this so that we can spread information and facts and love about the Olde English Bulldog. So again, thanks for joining us on Oldie World, where we talk about all things Olde English Bulldog.